rising over time. As you leave the dialysis center, those components are going to be at a normal level or lower than they were when you started. But between the treatments, they're going to start building up. So there's creatinine, urea, sodium, potassium, phosphorus, fluids, all of those build up between treatments. So this slide gives us kind of an example. It says potassium, but it can be any of those components. What happens is, let's say you have your treatment on Monday and your levels go down during treatment. And then between Monday and Wednesday, your levels go back up again because you're eating and doing the things that we do in life. And then you go in on Wednesday to have your treatment again, get your blood filtered, your levels go down again, Wednesday through Friday, same thing. And then we have a 2-day break between Friday and Monday. And so that's going to be the riskiest time for us because that's the longest time that we're going between your blood being filtered. So Mondays are going to be really important, or Tuesdays if you're Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, because those are very risky times for dialysis patients because you've gone 2 days without dialysis. So your levels are even more at risk of becoming dangerously high. And each of these components of your blood and of your body fluids have different side effects when they aren't managed. And when you have overload, you have higher intakes than you should or lower intakes than you should. And so it's super important that you, your dialysis team and your dietitian are taking a look at your levels and giving you regular feedback on whether you're doing the right thing or not. So suddenly, the recommendations that you were following before you were on dialysis just aren't exactly the same anymore. Maybe you had a recommendation and you did it for a year and everything was okay and you didn't have to make a lot of adjustments. But suddenly, 3 times a week, we're checking your blood and we're taking a look at what's going on because your kidneys aren't working and we're doing it for you. So that means we have to give you specific information on what you need to eat to be at your healthiest. So this is one reason that the diet is different for people on dialysis. Another reason is that dialysis causes protein needs to be higher. Protein is removed during filtration, so you have to eat more to replace those losses in order to stay nourished. Not eating enough protein can lead to muscle wasting and can lead to muscle loss. And that's going to contribute to poor nutrition status. You're going to be at higher risk for getting sick, for getting illnesses. You're going to have less ability to fight off those illnesses because you don't have enough protein stores in your body. So this is why the dietitian needs to assist people with determining how much phosphorus, potassium, and protein they should be eating. Many people are able to go back to a similar way of eating than they previously were before dialysis in terms of protein intake, because before dialysis, you're doing everything you can to keep from being on dialysis. And what that means is you're eating very little protein because you're trying to keep your kidneys from working as much as possible. Now that you're on dialysis, we know you're on dialysis. We know your kidneys aren't working. We start filtering the blood for you, and so we're cleaning out the components that build up over time, and you can now eat more protein and have to eat even more than you were at a healthy state because of what protein you're losing from the dialysis. So that can be a big change. So let's take a look at this slide. This is the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance for protein based on your age. This is not specific to any person. This is just a guide for us to use as an example today here. More protein, more accurate protein needs can be determined by your dietitian. A lot of things have to be taken into consideration. Your labs, your age, your health state. Do you have any wounds that are healing? Lots of different things. So this is just an example. Also, just an aside, this is something a lot of people don't know. The recommended dietary allowance, it was created years ago And what they did was find out the minimum amount of nutrients that someone needed to not have an illness or a deficiency. So the RDA for protein, the RDA for calcium, the RDA for all the different nutrients are not maximum intakes. They are the minimal amount that we need to have a healthy, non-deficient state, not optimal health. So let's just take a look at this. 19 to 70-year-old men need about 56 grams of protein a day at a minimum to not be deficient. So if we were going to use this as a guide for demonstrating dialysis protein needs, this number would need to be at the very least doubled. So 112 grams of protein minimum for a man between 19 and 70. Women would be slightly less. And in many cases, this is not going to be enough. The dietitian at your dialysis clinic will help you to know if you're eating enough proteins. Depending on what your labs look like, what your creatinine looks like, what your body is looking like, they're going to assess your muscle status periodically to make sure you're not losing muscle mass and that you are not losing fat. We don't want you to be malnourished. We want you to be healthy and nourished. And so you have to get enough protein to keep from losing muscle mass. So many times people need upwards of close to 200 grams of protein in a day, but your dietitian's going to help you with that. One of my favorite things to do when I worked in the dialysis clinic was to create my clients, my patients, report cards every month. So if you're on dialysis, you get those report cards and they basically say, protein, are you eating enough? You're not eating enough? How are you doing on phosphorus? How are you doing on potassium? And so that process, creating those report cards, takes a lot of time. I had to spend a lot of time in the office looking at labs, looking at weights, looking at nutrition status to come up with what each person needed to do. It's super easy for me to hand out those report cards and I can kind of give you your recommendations pretty quickly, but make no mistake, it took a long time for me to look at that and analyze you and figure out what your protein needs are going to be going forward and your other nutrition components. So it's not good for your dialysis treatments and your health if you don't consume enough protein or if you consume too much protein. And so we look at your labs, we look at your health, we look at your muscle status, and we will let you know if you need to cut back a little bit on protein or if you need to eat more protein. And we can help you with looking at what you're eating and giving you advice. Maybe you just need to eat a couple ounces less of protein, or maybe you just need to add a couple ounces of chicken or fish or eggs at a meal to get enough protein. So we'll help you figure that out. And a lot of people might not have a really good appetite, especially early on in dialysis when your blood is still pretty altered in where it should be. And so we have to kind of be creative and come up with what would work for you. Maybe you need to have as much protein as you can get in the morning because as the day progresses, you feel more sick, or maybe it's vice versa. So we have to be creative problem solvers and come up with different tricks and ways to help people get the protein that they need. The other thing about protein is we want you to have what we call high biological value protein. What that is are proteins that include all 9 of the essential amino acids. Many foods have some of those amino acids, but high biological value proteins contain all of them. Essential amino acids are the ones that our body can't create, so we have to eat them to have them. So when someone is a vegetarian, they're a little more risky for having deficiencies because they eat less foods that are high biological value proteins. You can still get them, but we have to pay careful attention to what you're eating to make sure you're getting them. So dialysis patients are recommended to consume at least half of their protein intake from high biological protein sources. These are meat, fish, poultry, eggs, tofu, dairy products, soy milk, and actually 60 or 70% from these food groups are even better. And then there's also a lot of new soy products on the market that can be incorporated in your diet if you don't like to rely so much on animal protein. Moving on to calories, it's important that you get enough calories for a variety of reasons. If you don't have a good appetite, if things don't taste well, if you have nausea, if things don't smell right, I mean, you just are not eating well, it can be even more challenging because you have to get enough calories in order to maintain nutrition status. It's super important for dialysis patients because if you're not getting enough calories, your body still needs to have has to create the energy that you have to live, to have metabolic processes that go on. And guess what? Your body's going to find them. Guess where they get them? If you're not eating enough calories, your protein intake is converted to energy intake. So back to that protein that you needed a lot of, if you're not getting enough calories, now you're going to have to eat even more protein because part of that protein is being used for energy. So it's important to get enough overall intake of calories to meet your needs, not just for your weight. That's what we think about when we think about calories, as we think about weight, losing weight, gaining weight. But for dialysis patients, it's essential. If you're not getting enough calories, then you are still probably at risk for losing muscle mass and becoming malnourished. So it's super important to get enough calories. So we want your dialysis team to pay attention to those things. Pay attention if you come in and you say your appetite's not been good this week, or you're just not able to eat enough, or maybe you're having trouble buying enough food or enough protein or enough calories to meet your needs. And in that case, we need to get the social worker on board to help you with getting the resources that you need to get food. So it's super important for us to pay attention to the fact that you're getting enough calories. Now let's talk a little bit about fluid. Fluid is one of those components that builds up between treatments, and it can be one of the trickiest parts of managing your diet for kidney disease and for renal failure, especially when it's 100 degrees outside like it is today here at my house, or it feels that way at least. If you consume too much fluid, you end up with swelling, what they call volume overload, swollen fingers, swollen ankles. You start feeling like you can't lay down flat to sleep. You have to sit up. So that's one of the things we always ask you when you come to dialysis. Are you able to lay flat? Because we want to know if you are retaining too much fluid, because that's going to be something important for us to note. Too much fluid can cause high blood pressure and shortness of breath. Now, the amount of fluid that you're allowed to drink is generally based on how much urine you're still producing. Many people, when they start dialysis, they're still producing a good amount of urine. So they may not have as large of a fluid restriction as someone who is producing no urine. Eventually, most people on dialysis end up with a pretty strict fluid restriction, somewhere between 1 and 1.5 liters. So 1 liter of fluid is 32 ounces. So if you have to limit your fluid intake to 32 ounces a day, that can feel very challenging. So when I talk to my patients that are on dialysis and they have to limit their fluids, I try to make it sound a little better. Telling you have to limit it to 32 ounces sounds pretty overwhelming. But what if we break it down? I can tell you, you can have 8 4-ounce cups of fluid a day, or you can have 6-ounce cups. We can break it up so many different ways. You could have 4 8-ounce cups, or you could have 8 2-ounce cups and 4 4-ounce cups. Now you're able to drink something 12 times in a day. So it's important to limit it, but we have to figure out what works for each individual. Different things work for different people. Having hard candy to put in your mouth can help with alleviating that dry mouth that you might have. But the reason this is super important is the more fluid buildup you have when you come back to dialysis, the more likely you're going to have complications during treatments. You're likely to come in with high blood pressure, and then you're very likely to become hypotensive or have low blood pressure during your dialysis treatments because so much fluid is having to be removed. That's when you get cramps, you get dizzy. Sometimes people end up having to go to the hospital because their blood pressure drops so low because they're having to remove more fluid. The most challenging time period is to keep that fluid off on that day where you have to skip 2 days. So from Friday to Monday or from Saturday to Tuesday. That's very tricky. And so as dietitians, we pay very close attention to how much fluid you're gaining when you come in after the weekend. Not to mention, we generally do more fun things on the weekend. So it can become even more challenging to stay within our fluid restriction. It's hard when we're at social events and nobody else is paying attention to how much they're drinking, but we have to because of our kidneys not working. There are so many things that have to be managed with kidney disease. I could talk to you all day long about your diet. Do you need to limit your protein, your potassium? Do you not need to limit your potassium? Many people had to have a strict potassium restriction up until the time they started dialysis. And now that they're on dialysis, their potassium is better managed. And so now suddenly they can eat some of the things that they love that they've been missing. Many people don't have the challenges with phosphorus when they first go on dialysis, but over time, after you're on dialysis, phosphorus becomes really challenging. And so that's another thing we have to spend a lot of time helping people on dialysis with, limiting the amount of potassium. They may be prescribed phosphorus. I get my P's mixed up sometimes. We have to limit phosphorus to keep those levels down at where they're supposed to be. Sometimes you're prescribed phosphorus binders, and these are medications or tablets that you take before you eat. And what they do is they bind the phosphorus that you eat with the medication, so it's excreted when you go to the bathroom instead of staying in your blood. So there's so many things to think about with your diet and dialysis. Like I said, I could talk about it all day, but I just wanted to help give you a little idea of the why behind these things you have to pay attention to with your diet. I think sometimes we're so busy in dialysis centers, dietitians can be assigned upwards of 100 or more patients in a week to take care of. And so we don't always have the time to talk about the whys. We just kind of give you the here's what you need to do part. So I wanted to spend time today talking about why these things are important. I hope that you have found this information to be helpful, and I am happy to answer some questions for you. And here's my contact information if anyone wants to reach out for any reason and chat with me.
Thank you so much, Kathy. If you don't mind, can you enter your email ID in the chat window so people can directly contact you with any questions that they might have?
Absolutely.
Maybe I'll just ask one quick question. Does the dietary allowance vary for home dialysis patients, or is it the same?
It very much differs. It is different for peritoneal. It can vary a lot with peritoneal dialysis, and it can also vary with home hemodialysis. And so there are typically dietitians assigned specifically to those people, or you might have a combination of both. But yeah, today I just chose to talk about in-center because that's still the primary place where people are dialyzed.
Indeed. Thank you, Kathy. So for everyone, if you have any questions for Kathy, please feel free to send her through the chat window, or her email ID. Once she puts it, you can send her an email. So there is one question, Kathy, maybe I'll just ask you that. I like to run and do cardio fitness. Will that mean I'll be able to drink more fluids? I think that's a good question.
So it might. It depends on how much you're sweating. And so it will require paying attention to how much you're